as a country, we should also be aware of unfair trade practices. Is it actually hurting our economy or is it actually helping our economy? I think these are the two things we should ask ourselves. And I completely subscribe to the point that we need manufacturing and we need a proper landscape.
Welcome to the Blue Circle. Thank you all very much for joining in today. It's such a big privilege and a pleasure to reconnect with everyone, our distinguished panelists who are handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience they bring in. And thank you to our distinguished audience for joining us. We've received over 400 registrations, 90% of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and business heads. Many of them are repeat visitors to our webinars. So this is very encouraging and motivates us to even provide higher levels of dialogue on the online modes as well. For those of you who are new with us today, the Blue Circle is an ecosystem curated for business leaders to manage disruptive times and become future ready. We focus on the 4 fundamental sectors, which are energy, e-mobility, real estate, and healthcare. We also present socio-economic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. In response to the COVID challenge, the Blue Circle also has accentuated its digital presence. One of the many modes we employ is our weekly webinar series across these sectors, our digital publication. We're also building a handpicked domain-focused expert pool drawn from among our leadership community from our member base that will guide businesses during and post-COVID in these 4 sectors. In addition to this, we will shortly be launching an exclusive digital platform, somewhat like the LinkedIn for Leaders, which will help leaders present them with the opportunity of connecting with leaders just like them, also house high quality curated content and meaningful conversations across these 4 sectors. So those leaders who are interested, please do write to us. And the topic for today's session is deep dive into solar supply chain and manufacturing. The discussion will revolve around what are the challenges and opportunities emerging in solar supply chain and manufacturing, and how should the government and the stakeholders respond to these to further the sector's growth. We're privileged to have invited prominent practitioners and thought leaders from the sectors. And now in the best interest of time, I will just quickly mention their names and designations. We have with us Mr. Gagan Varmani, CEO of MySun, Mr. James Abraham, founder and director of Solar Arise, Mr. Ramesh Nair, CEO of Adani Solar, Mr. Sunil Jain, CEO and ED, Hero Future Energies. And our moderator for the session is Mr. Pavan Chaudhary, best-selling author, CEO of French multinational Vigon, and sits on several boards across the country. Welcome, sirs, and thank you very much for joining. Kindly note that we will have Q&A towards the end of the session. Some of you have shared excellent questions and they're with the moderator now. And now I would request Mr. Chaudhary to please begin the session, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Siddharth. What I did for the questions and answers, as you know, Siddharth, we shared with the speakers all the questions which we have received so far and requested them to weave the answers or the responses in their talk. And over and above that, whatever questions we get, we will try to weave it in the talk. And if that is not possible, we will leave the ball back in your court so that every question which is asked is finally answered. So let's begin with that. And thank you very much, everybody. So Edison said that we will make electricity so cheap that only the rich will need to burn candles. Only the rich will burn candles. And today we are reaching that stage. Not only we are going to discuss how electricity is reaching that stage, but also what a democratic source of power we have got, which is the sun. And also what Edison might not have envisaged, that even to harness the sun's power, the process will not be so easy. It will go through a labyrinth maze. There will be challenges, there will be opportunities. So let us ask our panel today and begin with let us begin with asking that what are the challenges and the opportunities they see in the solar manufacturing and supply chain, in the indigenization, integration of solar manufacturing and supply chain. So let me begin with Ramesh, because Ramesh his company is really in the news. Adani Power has become a $13.7 billion, the capitalization has reached there. And that is really wonderful news. And let us begin with Ramesh and ask him that this dream of Edison, how do you think that solar can really help realize? Ramesh.
Thank you. Thank you, Blue Circle, for inviting me. So it's a pleasure to be here in this August gathering. And yes, I think you were specifically asking about manufacturing of solar and its supply chain, the overall overall ecosystem of manufacturing in this country. So I'll come to, I think I'll start with that. And solar manufacturing fundamentally starts all the way from polysilicon. So basically MG silica gets converted to polysilicon, and from polysilicon it goes into ingots, wafers, and from wafer it goes into manufacturing of cells and modules. And then finally these modules find their way into the various renewable farms, and they are sort of connected, and then the power gets generated and connected to the grid. So when we get into this, what do you have in India? If you look at the overall ecosystem of manufacturing, India currently has just the cell and module manufacturing. The manufacturing of wafers, ingots, polysilicon, none of these things exist in the country at this point of time. We have cells and module manufacturing, out of which module manufacturing is about 10 gigawatts, and the cell manufacturing is about 3 gigawatts. So there is a certain gap between the two also in the country. Because cell manufacturing obviously entails more detailed manufacturing, more capital costs, and more risk on the raw material pricing. So obviously the number of players that are there in cell manufacturing are far lesser than what you find in module manufacturing, which is a far simpler, it's an assembly line basically in module line. And in the large players, obviously Adani is a large player in this, about 1.3, 1.4 gigawatts come from our manufacturing unit in Mundra. We have Tata's, and then we have Jupiter, we have Renewsys, and a few other companies. And the closest after Adani is about 400 megawatt that's coming from the Tata group. Obviously, in the current scenario, with a lot of incentives coming from the government and the DCR and all those kind of things, we have seen some announcements of expansion in this sector, which is very, very heartening. Though I would say it is a little late that has come in, it could have been done a little earlier. But nevertheless, it's always good to have manufacturing to happen in the country by the side of development at all times. As regards wafer ingot and the backward integration of manufacturing setup, the country currently do not have anything, and we don't have much of announcements on that front at this point of time. But we do understand the government is actively looking at incentivizing the wafer ingoting route, and maybe at some point of time the polysilicon route too. When we talk about manufacturing, we should also understand that there is an overall ecosystem of solar manufacturing, which also says when we look at manufacturing of modules, or when we look at manufacturing of cells for that matter, if you look at module has various other components besides cells. It has got backsheet, it has got EVA resins, it has got aluminum frames, it has got copper interconnects, it has got junction boxes. So these are all actually forming part of the overall ecosystem of manufacturing, and the glass, of course, the glass that is there. If it is bifacial, there are two pairs of glasses, at times transparent backsheet on the backside. But on the front side, there's always glass becomes a very critical component of the solar manufacturing ecosystem. So if you look at these things, even on the glass side, we have about 2.5 gigawatts of glass manufacturing in the country, led by Borosil. And beyond that, we don't have any leading player actually in the glass section. On the aluminum frame, as a country, we lack tremendously. As of now, we speak in our EMC in Mundra, we have an ancillary being put up for glass manufacturing to the tune of 1 gigawatt. But then that is nothing as compared to what the country needs, to the tune of something like about 7-8 gigawatts per annum. Most of it is getting imported from China. And also the EVA and the backsheets also. And the country has nearly 2 gigawatts of capacity, 1.5 to 2 gigawatts capacity, out of which 1 gigawatt each lies as part of ancillaries and our EMC at Mundra, remaining primarily lying with Renesas, who is also a leading manufacturer in EVA and backsheet. Having said that, so you would see that there is about 20% of the country's requirement of all these components are actually made within the country, and the remaining are all getting imported, which means there is a huge space for investing, a huge space for entering into this area of glass, aluminum frame, JBs, copper interconnect. And so if you look at the whole manufacturing scape, we assume that the company requirement of the country is actually made in India. We can generate nearly 1 lakh jobs per annum. And that is a huge thing that we have to focus on as a country, and also prevent a huge flow of forex in terms of importing all these goods, which currently the country is going through. Even on the module side, if you see the maximum amount of modules in India, about 80-90% of modules get imported. And that is one of the reasons why manufacturing in India has not taken up, because of the dumping that happens from China. Having said that, the country has taken certain measures in the last 2 years on imposing safeguard duty or BCD, which is being talked about. But then, like I always say in all forums, that development and manufacturing have to go hand in hand. The country needs cheap power, but at the same time, the cheap power should be also encouraged to be made from domestically manufactured goods or modules. We cannot say that one can exist at the cost of the other, or the other is not required, and we can import the whole manufacturing, outsource the manufacturing to some other country, which is practically what is happening in the country to a large extent. And for that reason, one of the major stumbling blocks that the country has had in terms of manufacturing, and that we could have actually incubated the manufacturing quite better, has been the consistency of policy in terms of making a consistent policy which makes manufacturing robust and which encourages, incentivizes manufacturing in the country, and also discourages dumping from China primarily. As we speak, the government is seized of this activity, and then they are very convinced that this part of the dumping has to be addressed. It has to be properly taken care of. And so we see that there is a spate of DCR schemes which has been brought out by the government to incentivize the domestic manufacturing. Incentivize, when I see it, is not exactly for the existing manufacturers. It is also to allow new people to come in, and that is something that we also can see that new players are actually announcing, and the manufacturing of modules and cells, which actually happens in China, should actually be happening in India. It's a question of shifting the base of manufacturing from one geography to our own geography. It is very akin to what we have seen in the auto sector, wherein the government put steep duties initially to bring the auto manufacturing into the country. And as a country, we have to have manufacturing because that's what keeps the jobs going, that's what keeps the country going, that's what keeps the economy going. So with these words, I think I'll sum it up. I think I've given a broad contour. I think I'll leave it to...
Broad contour, and let me just add to what you have said. The energy space, as it is as a geopolitics space, starting from however energy has evolved, it has been in the geopolitics space. Energy security is important, and that is another reason why we have to indigenize.
Exactly.
However, just to broaden the dialogue and make sure that we do not miss any other streams of thought, let me bring in James and Gagan. And before I bring them in, let me preface that there have been, there is historical experience of how countries have done when they followed a particular policy. For example, Germany followed the policy of subsidy. However, China reduced the cost of modules and cells to such an extent that they had to take off the subsidies, and all those companies which were rising fell. US brought in the policy of import restrictions and tariff increase, even Super 201 against China. However, that did not add to the manufacturing capability there. It came down from 7 gigawatts to 3.1 gigawatts. Understanding very well that this is a geo-economic or geopolitical question, and that angle also will have to be brought in, which will further consolidate your case, Ramesh. But before that, let us see what other experts might want to say about what has been the consequence of safeguard duties on expansion of the entire deployment piece. James.
Thank you, Pavan, and thank you, Blue Circle, for the invitation. And Ramesh, great to hear the way Adani is growing. As a developer of large projects, I want to first put out one thing where what Ramesh said really resonated, that this is not about whether we need development in large projects or whether we need manufacturing. This is not an or situation. We actually need both. And as a country to grow forward, we need to think about having both. The question is how to do this. How do we get low cost power and a competitive manufacturing sector in place at the same time? And I'll just bring up one point in my initial thoughts, and others we can do in Q&A. Pavan, you mentioned the US policy of trying to support their manufacturing that did not lead to a large growth in the manufacturing sector. On the other hand, we do know that China has a very aggressive industrial policy that has led to rapid growth in manufacturing, rapid competitive advancement. So the question is not whether or not government policy can help the manufacturing sector. The question is what kind of policy can help. My concern the fault that
We've lost you.
Am I back? I know I'm getting misinformation. Sorry about that. Yeah, so my issue with the duties and every structures that we've had is not the duty itself or the structure. It's that the government has had a very short-term mindset and has had very inconsistent timeframes and policies. We've had debates and discussions of BCDs and safeguard duties going back 5-6 years, but we've only had 2 years of safeguard duty. And it was programmed to end. And the continuance of that came literally weeks before the ending, as opposed to a long vision that says, here's our 5 to 10 year horizon. The extension of the safeguard duty came for only 1 year. It didn't come for multiple years. The BCD, the basic customs duty, is under discussion, but that discussion again has been going on for several government timeframes. In fact, the BCD, the customs duty, I think has had a lifespan longer than any government has been in place. The discussion has had a lifespan longer than any one government in place, which is quite sad. I mean, I think if we are serious about supporting the manufacturing sector, then we need to put a consistent policy in place that has a long horizon, 5, 6, 10 years, and that's absolutely clear. Now, why am I saying that as a developer? Wouldn't my costs go up? Well, see, the way our business works is fairly simple. If I know the idea is not what my cost is, but it's having clarity on my cost structure. If I have clarity on my cost structure, then I can bid into projects and be able to win and expect.
I think we have lost James again. So basically he's saying that the policy should be more thorough. It should be watertight, and it should have a longer time horizon, which I felt Ramesh was also saying. And the point which James was making, that long-term purchase agreements, also if the companies can make, because of short-term changes in custom duties, etc., they become ineffective, and you cannot plan that well. Gagan, what would you like to add to what James has said? And we'll come to James later.
Yep. Thanks, Pavan. So I think the thoughts are not very different from what Ramesh and James have said. I totally endorse the view that the short-term policy, or especially around the trying to curtail the imports of equipment into India by imposing duties, hasn't served its purpose. So when it came, we were not even clear what's the end objective, because it was just a 2-year policy, and we were told that it is intended to spur the growth of manufacturing in India. Now we all know any sane business, whether it's an Indian business house or any global manufacturing company, if they would want to set up a manufacturing base, which requires huge investments, as Ramesh said, that it's not just the module assembly which is there. It's basically the back end, the cell or the wafer or the ingots and the silicon processes. All of that requires massive amount of investments. And no one is going to base their investment decisions on a visibility of a 2 or a 3 year roadmap in terms of the domestic manufacturing or the Make in India requirement. On the other side, I just want to add 2 points. So when these kind of knee-jerk policies or reactions from government comes, it impacts the industry in two manners. One, the projects which are already in the pipeline, they are severely impacted. The projects that are bid out, the projects that are under discussion or under the manufacturing phase, they are severely impacted. The financials go for a toss. The second major impact is, because I come from a background these days, from a background of in the distributed solar space, what happens is that off-takers have a tendency, or the buyers or the industry which are required to make capital investments, they have a tendency to procrastinate. See, solar is not a priority. An off-taker would has no urgency. If they can use solar after 6 months or 1 year, they'll as well do it. So if a policy says that after 6 months, the duty will come down from, let's say, 25% to 15%, a lot of off-takers will say, okay, fine, let's wait for 1 more year. What's the hurry? So what it does is it delays the decision making, it delays the deployment. So rather than helping the deployment of large-scale solar, or solar at a large scale rather, what it does is exactly the opposite of it. So therefore, it defeats the very purpose for which the policies are made. And also, I fail to understand when we talk about, it's first of all, let me clarify, I am totally for a very robust manufacturing ecosystem in India. We all need that, not just from an energy security perspective, but also not just for meeting our own requirements, but also for being a manufacturing base for exports to the rest of the world. So not only it's our 10, 20 gigawatts or 100 gigawatts, we can actually set up much larger targets in terms of manufacturing capacities. In fact, I'm a great believer of another solar mission manufacturing base, where instead of a 100 megawatt deployment, we should also have 100 gigawatt manufacturing based solar mission targets also, not just the solar panels output, but also as cells, ingots. So everything has to be included when we look at manufacturing per se. But what I fail to understand is that when we resist the import of, or we call it dumping, from countries like China, the reasons that we typically give are that Chinese government provides them incentives. So what it does, it subsidizes their electricity, it subsidizes the interest rate on the loans that are given to them, and therefore the panels that they manufacture or the products that they manufacture are much cheaper. And therefore, to have a competitive environment in India, we should have protection against those imports. Now, my question is, why can't the government provide the same facilities, same incentives, same subsidies to the Indian manufacturers? So rather than providing or replicating what China is doing, what we do end up with our duties. So it is not helping. It's not helping the domestic manufacturing. We all are proud of what Adani has done, being the largest solar player in the world. But what we want more Adanis. We want much larger ecosystem in India. And unfortunately, the way this incentivizing the domestic manufacturing has been taken up in entirety, I think we need to have a complete relook at it. So rather than trying to put restrictive policies, let's put up enabling policies in place. And I think that will go a long way in ensuring a robust manufacturing setup in India.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point that restrictive policies and what you alluded to may have some unintended consequences also, which history is telling us that have been there. For example, when the US increased the tariffs from China and blocked Chinese goods for imports, then China moved its facilities to other countries. when US realized these are actually Chinese manufactured products or Chinese owned products which are coming through other countries, it blocked those entries also, which made these Chinese companies go back to China and scale up. And they scaled up so much that the difference between the price was so high that the US industry could not bear this international disparity, and got completely disheartened and started going down. But this is also still a part of the equation. I will surely have some points in favor of what Ramesh said, because this sector has become much bigger than just an energy sector. It is somewhere in the energy come defense space today. Sunil, let me come to you to try to reconcile these points of view or add your own point. Sunil.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, I have been always a proponent of free market, but with China as your competing partner, I don't think so such economic laws truly apply. Having said that, let's come to a basic question. While Ramesh and all the other co-panelists have mentioned about a consistent policy, absolutely no doubt on that. And I'm of a believer that for anything, any policy has to be a 5-year policy, because any investment takes at least 3 years to fructify and needs another 2 years to recover part of it. So 5-year consistent policy is a must for any investment across any sector, and more so for solar manufacturing. But let's come to a moot point. We have a large market. We are talking about a 10 to 15 gigawatt annual market for demand for solar modules. Okay, let me say it's another 18 gigawatt on a higher side. Now, you are asking a protection for 18 gigawatt market. Am I right? The Chinese manufacturing capacity by end of next year will be over 120 gigawatt. A single company in China would be twice as big as our total demand. So the economies of scale are so huge that no matter how much incentives government tries to give you, it will ultimately become counterproductive. You will not be able to, meet those kind of things. A couple of years, yes, I agree, you will meet immediately, but their scales and their price down will come down so much that even after duties and taxes, they'll still be competing with the Indian manufacturer. So answer does not lie in putting up custom duty, safeguard duties. These are short-term measures. And as we all said, and we all agree, that we need a long-term policy horizon. The technology in this world is changing by the day, and in solar, the technology changes every 6 months. It requires huge investments to change over to new technologies gradually. We have been last year talking of 410 watt peak modules. We are already talking of 600 and 650 watt peak modules. Already by next year, you'll have that. So all I'm trying to say is, let us become more efficient and let us make a ecosystem which will deliver us those cost efficiencies. You need a co-located supply chain with large manufacturing base. I believe Adani can do it, Tata's can do it, many other large corporate houses can do it, the way it has been done for auto industry. You need that kind of a scale. And then you don't need it only for 18 gigawatt India. You need it for another 80 gigawatt outside India. So if you look at the market size of 100 gigawatt and then start looking at your manufacturing capability and scale, I believe you will be far, far more competitive. So let me assure you that Government is telling you to become Atmanirbhar and not Sarkar Nirbhar. We are trying to say that, okay, we will become Atmanirbhar, but please continue to support me and I should be also Sarkar Nirbhar. And if you give an inch to a government, it will take a yard. Today they will support you. Tomorrow, God knows. We are a democratic country. The policies change with the change in governments. So you have to stand on your own feet. And what is more important is have a complete value chain manufacturing system. It is extremely important for us. And why I say it is important is I'm totally against importing from China, if you honestly ask me. Because of the energy security and because of the geopolitical situations, you actually have to be Atmanirbhar. You cannot survive otherwise. James talked about the safeguard duty coming for 1 year and basic custom duty not even coming. Well, you are in a global market and you have signed a WTO agreement. The basic custom duty is not being imposed because they are still finding a way around how to impose BCD to, counter the WTO framework. So at one side, you are a part of a global framework. Other side, you have got the domestic compulsions. And third, you've got energy security. And fourth, we are not competitive. Yes, I agree we are not competitive because China gives a lot of incentives. Agree with, Gagan that we can replicate some of them and move forward in life. But what is more important for me is that we only talk of manufacturing. We also have to parallelly start talking of the R&D. I have suggested a model to the government where I have said that National Institute of Solar Energy should be converted into a large R&D system organization where some of the PSUs and private companies can invest and let the solar module and solar energy development take place under a private, it is like a PPP, public-private partnership, where private people can bring in the best of minds for that R&D center. And that technology can be used. Today, solar is a commodity. There is no such thing as patent. Minor patents are being used, but that's not a big deal, actually, ask me. Until it is a radically different technology itself. I just want to understand, the government of India is saying, please manufacture cell, please manufacture module. That is domestic manufacturing. Very well. What about glass? What about frames? What about EVA? What about backsheet? All these have to be manufactured. Aluminium, we are one of the largest aluminium manufacturers in the world and we can't extrude these aluminium frames. Very surprising. Then, if you can do that, what happens now to the wafers and ingot? Today, those also have to be imported from China. You reduce your prices here, China will increase the prices of wafers. Then you have to start manufacturing wafers. Then you start importing ingot. And look at what happened. Some of the ingot manufacturers caught cold and we started sneezing. And today we are all struggling.
Yeah.
And we have to coexist. What James and Ramesh said, both manufacturing and IPPs have to coexist because one cannot survive without the other.
Yeah.
But the other more important point I want to make is that the government cannot have its cake and eat it too. While at one side they want a domestically manufactured modules and systems to be installed, but they want a 2 rupees 40 paisa tariff. In the current scenario, that's not possible.
Yeah.
The government should be willing to pay 3 rupees or the right price for the power. That's extremely important because then both have to be actually financially viable, manufacturing and IPP. If one goes down, the other also goes down.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent points. In a nutshell, what you have said, actually what you have done, in a nutshell, first let me tell you what you have said. You have reminded me of a couplet. नहीं जमते ये जमीन आसमां तो छोड़ दे इनको, नहीं जमते ये जमीन आसमां तो छोड़ दे इनको, लेकिन पहले नए जमीन आसमान पैदा कर ले. So what you are saying is that the deployment piece allow it to continue while you bring manufacturing strengths in a big way, and then switch from this horse to that horse without disturbing the pace of development of the sector. This is the first point which you have made in a nutshell. And you have opened up the dialogue. And these are the points which we should now discuss among the panelists. The first point which you have made is regarding free market. You have said you believe in free markets, but with China as a competitor, how fair would free market approach would be is your question mark. And I was reminded that in the 17th and 18th century, the British government gave full protection to the wool industry. And then industrialization came. And when their produce became in various industries as good as the best in the world, they started talking about global trade, globalization. That means the rules of the world were favoring the mighty because the mighty were making the rules. Now India should also become one of the authors of these new rules which are made. So free market approach has to be circumscribed by the reality of the situation and historical disadvantages which we may have had. The second point you brought is the policy should be long-term, and because technology is very fast changing, perhaps you have alluded to that when in a very fast changing technology space, the policy should be technology agnostic. Otherwise, it will keep on stumbling the industry again and again. The third point you brought in regarding subsidy, and this is also proven true in Europe, where Germany gave a lot of subsidy, but it could not match the prices which were diminishing every day from the Chinese factories, and its own industry collapsed. And the point regarding energy security also I would like to debate on. You are saying that our over dependence on oil imports should not tomorrow get replaced by our over dependence on photovoltaics. Okay, that means from one kind of let me say exploitation, we will end up in another kind of exploitation. And the R&D piece also which you have brought up is very nice. And the last point which you have brought up is scale. So a lot of companies in China have been consolidated to get scale. And it is great that companies like Adani are already bringing that scale to the sector. This point also I would like to debate, because I have heard on earlier occasions from James and Gagan that sun shines on everybody. That means it's a very democratic resource. It is also perhaps a resource which will not allow the same level of corruption which has existed in the conventional energy sector. And if it is such a democratic resource, then should is it very important, or it is inevitable that scale will rule here, or there is some other way where we can make the manufacturing landscape also democratic? So coming with these questions and these points to Ramesh, whose company has really done proud for us, and it has also given us the opportunity to compete with the giants in China, because the giants in China cannot be competed by, let me say, for want of a better word, dwarfs. We also want a giant. So we have a giant, but we would like to see what are the points of view which Ramesh brings on these points. Ramesh.
Yeah. You raised about 4 or 5 points in terms of the scale, I think the consistency of policy, I think those kind of things. So I think I see there are a lot of things we should understand in a manufacturing landscape. I think it's most important to have consistency of policy. A safeguard duty or any protection, if it is levied for a very short period with a telescopic rate, and if it is levied at the drop of a hat, they are seen as more disruptive. The moment they are levied with a certain thought process and for a longer period of time, then they are seen to be enabling. So the question of being disruptive and enabling is actually the way we actually impose it. And I agree with Mr. James also when he said, or I think Gagan made the point that, these kind of short-term knee-jerk measures, overnight measures actually do not help the industry at all, especially the developers. Even the manufacturing also does not help, because the manufacturer never trusts duties for 2 years, because they don't know what's going to happen at the end of 2 years, so they don't invest also. The other point that Mr. Sunil Jain made was on the scale, and I completely agree with him. That, but then the point also should understand that China needs just about 40 gigawatts of panels every year. Why are they manufacturing 100 gigawatts? So that's something like we should also ask ourselves: isn't that something like an economic hegemony that they're getting into? And do we need to allow them to get into that kind of a situation where they want to manufacture all the solar panels of what the world needs in China and then export it from there? If you remember the year before, they just did about 25 gigawatts of development inside China, and they manufactured something like 80 gigawatts. And with US completely clamping down on China, they had no other option but to dump it into India. And they just slashed prices. They were selling it. I knew Chinese suppliers to whom we were talking to. They were simply dumping it into India at variable cost. They just were doing volumes, nothing else. Even if you see a panel selling price within China, they are far higher than what they sell outside. So there are things that we should understand, that one is definitely free market, but one is also that as a country, we should also be aware of unfair trade practices. Is it actually hurting our economy, or is it actually helping our economy? I think these are the two things we should ask ourselves. And I completely subscribe to the point that we need manufacturing and we need a proper landscape. As a large sector like steel couldn't survive the onslaught of dumping, and they had to be given protection through minimum import pricing and the protection through safeguard. Otherwise, the whole steel sector was collapsing in this country. So it is not. It is a different game that we should all be aware of. And we, like Mrs. Sunil Jain said, I also do not like what's happening, and we cannot be importing our complete requirement from a different geography. We have to develop a capability with a consistent policy spread over a larger period of time, so that it doesn't hurt the developer. Developer also has a fair sight of what his costs are going to be, because he bids today, he develops say 18 months from now. So he needs a consistency of policy. And for a manufacturer to put his equity in, to put his money where his mouth is, he definitely needs to put his skin in the game. He definitely needs a larger policy framework which shows that he is taken care of by the economy and against unfair practices. R&D definitely is something that we need. There are no two doubts about R&D, and there are no two doubts about personally, me coming from metal sector, after heading copper aluminum companies, there is one sector I found the toughest part of this sector is the movement of technology at all times. Besides all the challenges of manufacturing, interest costs, everything, marketing, there's an additional challenge in this sector, which is fundamentally coming from the technology movement. And yes, we have seen 430, 440 watt peak panels. It's currently jumping up to 500, 550. But then we also should see that those kind of panels are those which are coming at larger sizes. And it has got its own challenges in terms of deployment, trackers, and those kind of things. But fine, as an industry, we would come out of it. But then there's a continuous innovation that's going on. The largest panel, I think the last NEC, which was only attended by Chinese, was about, if I remember, just for showcase purposes, it was the size of a 7 feet door with 3 meter width roughly, and it was generating 800 watt peak roughly. That's what the Chinese are claiming. So you've got multiple varieties of what suits you, but the cell efficiency remains almost where it is for the last year or so. It's a module size and the module efficiency that's being worked upon by the country. Did I answer, Pavanji, or anything more from my side?
Yes. Excellent points. Really, you've added further to the discussion. You have brought in the point that China-based offshoring should be replaced, at least replaced by, for the time being, by friendshoring, by offshoring with countries which have a shared history of peace and similar political dispensation, so that we cover up that energy security angle also, and don't have viruses, malware coming in the equipment and products which can be activated tomorrow by cyber intrusion. So you are very well, and that also is applicable to other countries like US, etc. US also should depend on exports from friend countries like India, which can stand up to the threat of China. Because Malaysia, Singapore, etc., they cannot stand up to the threat of China in this geography. So which makes our exports also perhaps more attractive if you see it from this lens, and this image should be surely projected in front of the
and the other point, Pavanji, is, simple mathematics is we need jobs, and manufacturing gives jobs in any economy. Development gives jobs at different points of time, but then the job gets finished when the project is over. But manufacturing is a distinct job creating avenue. And look at the GDP percentage of manufacturing in this country. It's just about 16-17%, and it's high time we move to something like and China is about 33-34%. So we are doing development at the cost of not having employment in this country. And where is the power going to be sold? Whatever power you generate cheap, you should finally have the purchasing power among the people. So I think both have to go hand in hand in terms of economic development, job creation, and then the cost of power. You may give power 2 rupee 40 paise, 2 rupee 30 paise, but then people should be able to buy the power also. There should be enough takers for that power. There should be enough increase in power consumption in the country, which has to come from the purchasing power increase in the economy.
Correct. And employment, I mean, they say that solar energy is extremely conducive and beneficial for those two communities which have been most strongly hit by COVID. One is the marginalized worker who's lost his job, and he can be brought into into the employment intensive nature of this industry, as well as the old and immunocompromised people who are hit further because of the pollution, which is adding to the number of diabetes, adding to the number of asthma-based patients. Great points you've made. I will be coming back to you with some questions which have come. One is on wafer, ingot, and polysilicon production. Second is, how will we respond as a PV and a module maker and cell maker on the sizes, the new sizes which China has brought in, and how will we make the technology which we go in for, where we are investing, companies like you are investing hundreds and thousands of crores, how will we make sure that we choose those technologies which are not stuck on a particular platform and graduate to the new developments which happen in the manufacturing technology space? Coming to James with the same questions regarding scale. How important is it in your mind for companies to have scale, or you wish to provide an alternate structure of the industry which is more inclusive? James.
So for a couple of things, I do want to talk about scale. I think that's a very critical, important question, especially in this sector. There are two other points I wanted to quickly offer a counterpoint on. First, there's a comparison of imports of solar panels and in energy security versus import of oil. These two things we can't compare them with each other. And I've often heard about this talked in the same sentence. And the reason are twofold. One is they're not substitutable. We don't use, just because we have more solar panels doesn't mean we'll have less oil imports. These things are, because oil is not used in the power sector. It's used, or it's a very small part of our power sector. It's used in cars, of course, heating oil, yes. And so as soon as you see solar and electricity moving towards transportation, heating, and others, then we can talk about substitution. Until then, solar panels coming in for power is not substitutable with oil. The second is, oil is a consumption product. We use it when we import it. It's used today. Panels and other equipment that we import are capital products. They're used over a 25-year period. So just because we have a trade deficit today in it, doesn't mean that it's an annual hit on our budget. It's actually here for the next 25 years. So these things are not comparable with each other. So throwing numbers around and saying they're comparable kind of detracts from the point that's going on. The second issue is around labor and workforce. Absolutely. I mean, India desperately needs employable industries. Frankly, neither of our industries, manufacturing or development, is going to be a large employer of people. It's just not. I mean, you talk about the sheer numbers. I mean, the last thing I saw, if we were to get to 200, 170, 100 gigawatts of solar, 175 gigawatts of renewables, we can actually displace the 500,000 people who work in coal. But frankly, 500,000 people who work in coal is not really that's still only a dent in the employment issue that India faces. So as a government sitting there looking at employability, frankly, neither of our industries really offers a solution to them. So that's not that argument is not relevant in this, right? So the question comes back to, we still need to be self-reliant on technology. And I completely agree with Sunil on this. I mean, I would much rather buy from my neighbors here in India rather than having to go all the way to China to do it. I have lots of issues around contracts. I have lots of issues around trying to manage quality when I buy from China. And I have lots of issues in dealing with imports when it's coming in. The idea of being able to deal with people in India to buy this stuff is so much easier, so much better for the entire industry, as it were. Now, to make that happen, I mean, again, what Sunil said about scale, what Pavan talked about consistency of policy, we do need that. We desperately need that horizon. This is an industry that is going to go through rapid evolutions. Something Ramesh said in his opening remarks really struck me. I did not know this, that the aluminum framing in a 4 solar panels, that's like a 2 gigawatt kind of industry today. Glass is less than that. When you look at the supply chain, we talk about this here, the supply chain parts of it itself are still subscale. And when I say subscale, I mean—
James, just to intervene, aluminum frame is it's almost zero in the country. I talked about glass, it's about 2 gigawatts.
Okay, thank you, Ramesh. That's even worse. and this one, Sunil is saying we have that's true. We have one of the best aluminum industries, largest aluminum industries in the world.
We have something like about 4 million tons of aluminum primary.
Yeah, none of it helping us in our industry. So we have a massive supply chain problem before we even get to manufacturing. And when we talk about subscale, we should be talking about players that are 10, 15 gigawatts, single players, not, and I love that Adani is pushing, and exactly, Adani, Tata, there are a handful of people, and by handful, I don't mean 1 or 2, I mean 5 to 10 people who can actually put up these kinds of scale. We need that scale because of the rapid evolution, we're going to see lines getting obsoleted quickly. When you have efficiencies increasing, module sizes increasing, the only way you can obsolete lines is to have the capacity to pay them off quickly. So we can't remain at subscale. And we need the ability to obsolete quickly to get our R&D into commercialization quickly. So having somebody who sets up a 200 megawatt module manufacturing is, only interesting for headlines. It is not a interesting business going forward. Having somebody set up multiple gigawatts, that's the beginning of a great story. And that's a story that should get us to 10, 15 gigawatt type of scale. It requires scaled investments in the supply chain side, aluminum, glass, copper container, and so on. Sorry, last quick thing I'll say, you mentioned something about the threat of China and cyberspace. I understand that argument in telecom. That argument does not exist in solar. I mean, I check my panels. There are no communication facilities in there unless they've put a timed explosion of the junction box that makes the panel obsolete. So the cyberspace issue in my solar panel imports, I'm not concerned about. I think there are just more fundamental industrial strategy reasons as to why we should have this in the country.
So very, very interesting, James. Really nice points, and I'm glad for you bringing up these points. Just to complement them, in 1918, Lenin said that communism will ride on the twin wheels, mega wheels of the Soviet state, strength of the Soviet state, and electrification of the country. Around the same time, Churchill, understanding that the ships which are fired by coal need oil which makes them much more efficient, and for his warships, this is very much important. He carved out the territory of Iraq so that an energy source of oil becomes available to him. Similarly, US went to Saudi Arabia and established its protectorate. Russia went to the CIS countries. China went to Sudan, Nigeria, Iran, etc. So now that was the energy which was required. Now the resources which are going into making that energy are changing. they are becoming, it is possible to imagine a future where there'll be a lot of non-renewables and a lot of nuclear power. It was from this perspective, I think I and the panel said that not oil, you're right, it is not oil, it is fossil-based fuels. Our dependence on fossil-based fuels, not only import dependence, otherwise also energy dependence on fossil-based fuels, should not be replaced by our dependence on products which we require to make energy which we cannot make in India. This was the point. And your other points are extremely valid, and I would like to bring it to Gagan now. Gagan, what is it that you would like to add to what James has already said?
So we're saying enough has been said about the importance of scale. I think we all agree on two things. Scale is important, and long-term policy vision is important. I think what we are trying to do here is that in spite of we all understanding what is required to be done, the government is still not listening. So the challenge is not about, I think even the government circles, everyone knows, I'm sure all the smart people would have given all these simple advice to the policymakers. But the challenge is, do we have the wherewithal or the line of sight to develop a 10-year roadmap? As I said earlier, can we have 100 gigawatt manufacturing ecosystem? And by manufacturing, I'm not saying just the module assemblers here, but I'm saying the entire ecosystem right up to the processing of silicon and ingots. Can we have a target of 100 gigawatt? We all know what an initial target of 20 gigawatt, which was later on increased to 100 gigawatt under solar mission, did to the country's solar plants. Even though we may not be able to meet the entire 100 gigawatt target, but I think what India has achieved is primarily due to the very aggressive targets that we have kept. So can we do by 2025 a 100 gigawatt manufacturing target of the entire ecosystem, and then so on? If government can develop a roadmap, and I'm sure industry can help a government implement that or think about that in a much better way, I think we, rather than just having one very large company, I mean, it's the same point that I made a couple of days back also. What I would like to see is 3 or 4 Indian companies amongst the top largest 10 global companies, at least when it comes to solar panel manufacturing. We shouldn't be just happy with one company, and maybe 20 large companies in the top 50. Now, if we can develop a vision and a target to make in India for the world, and trying to achieve scale through such quantifiable targets, I think that is what government needs to do. We always act when something has happened, right? We see, okay, China is dumping material. Let's put up a policy quickly in place and let's see what best can we do, right? So we're always trying to improvise. I think the time for improvisation is over. Solar has come to a stage where it is fast. It has very quickly become a very large potential industry, and we cannot run this kind of an industry on the whims and fancies of the government of the day. It has to last at least a decade. Any plan that we make has to last at least a decade. Otherwise, it is bound to fail. If we do not have a target that tells us, okay, we are going to have this much capacity of ingots processing or manufacturing in India, X capacity of cell or wafer manufacturing in India, till that time that those targets are not there, I think we would have sporadic instances of 1 or 2 or 3 companies standing out and making a name for themselves. But that would not be an inclusive growth. The inclusive growth would be when we have the entire ecosystem growing. We have the large scale industries as well as the medium, as well as the small scale industries. When China started making it big in the solar panel manufacturing space, there were hardly 3 or 4 companies we could hear of: Suntech, Jingli Solar, and Trina. I think these were the 3 names which really stood out when the solar industry from China started developing. But look at what is happening there in today. We hear all sorts of names, everyone claiming to have a 1 gigawatt, 1.5 gigawatt, 2 gigawatt of capacities. So if there are hundreds of players who can exist in a market, like China, making it for the world, not just for their domestic consumption. Why can't India think of something like that? There is still time in this industry for India to make a huge impact on the world's consumption or the requirements for solar manufacturing. So that's my 2-bit on this.
Excellent points. And you also brought another contrarian view, which is making the whole discussion very comprehensive. Just to add 2 facts to that. One is Vikram Solar has said that it is getting into wafers in a big way. So that is one point. And in 2006, you're right, out of the top 10 cell manufacturers, only 2 were Chinese. Today, all 10 of them are Chinese. So that is how that growth has happened. And third thing which you have said is everybody has said that scale is important. You have added another nuance to it. You have said that scale is important and we need to maybe have 5-10 big companies which provide the scale. But medium-sized and small-sized companies are also important. It makes the sector more inclusive. It also makes the sector more agile. We have known that in aeronautics and shipbuilding industry, the change came not from there, but from a small bicycle manufacturer who was also participating in that area, who the Wright brothers were bicycle manufacturers and they created the aeroplane. All the big ones could not because of the bureaucracy, etc., which was going against innovation. Similarly, in the ICE engine space, all the top ICE engine makers did not make the electric vehicle. It was a small company called Tesla, which is very big now. So you are saying that when you have all of them working together, the market benefits. And the smaller companies also benefit because of the scale of large companies, because it gives a more enduring ecosystem as well as better technology and quality aspiration benchmarks are set. Great points. Coming to Sunil. Sunil, what would you like to add to these points as well as your comments on the 5 points which I had discussed just after I finished with you last time?
Well, firstly, I would like to, pick up that point which Ramesh said that, China's demand a couple of years back was 25 gigawatt internally, but they were manufacturing 80 gigawatt. So they were dumping. China, for any sector, leave aside the solar sector manufacturing, but for any manufacturing sector, the difference between India and China, or for that matter, the other parts of the world is, we look at the size of the market first, then start planning for our manufacturing, because we believe, oh, this is my market, which is a domestic market. And therefore, I would get out of a 10 gigawatt market, I would get 2 gigawatt. Let me plan for 2 or 2.5 or 3. China, on the contrary, for any product, creates a scale and then looks for a market. So what it does is that then they overpower all the markets. And once people are used to the pricing and those products, it's very difficult for you to woo them back. It's not easy to penetrate them. So what exactly I said earlier is that why should we be looking at only this 18 gigawatt market in India, and why not 50 gigawatt market for the world, which would give you scale. And for that, you need to be competitive. Having said that, I believe what Gagan was also saying, that you need some large players. I think so. For a country like India, which is probably a democratic country, and I believe Chinese market, you must have heard that there was a cartelization used to happen, earlier amongst the players, like cement players were very famous for their cartelization in Indian market. Similarly, there is a cartelization in the Chinese market, which probably we are not aware of. If you see the movement of Chinese pricing, it is heavily influenced by the government, and they cartelize that pricing. Now we have to go deep into that to understand what all they are trying to do, and therefore frame our strategies and policies how to do that. We are trying to do a manufacturing 5 years late, if you honestly ask me. But still, it's not too late. Because we still have, if I go by Prime Minister vision of 2030, it's 450 gigawatt. And out of that 450 gigawatt, definitely 300 gigawatt will be solar. Now, if that is the case, you still have got another 250 gigawatt of market waiting for you in next 10 years. So that's a huge market. But only question is how you scale up and protect that market at least. And then you scale up to a second stage where you go out and compete with the China. I'll give you a classic example of motorcycles. Almost 12 to 15 years back, China was all over the world in motorcycles. They were the largest manufacturers everywhere. But the only place where they could not enter was India and Japan. And the purely reason was Indians continued to scale up in capacities and bringing down costs, whereas maintaining the quality. In motorcycles, Chinese scaled up in quantity, but they were not able to match the quality. They were able to copy Japanese models or any models. And I still remember that, there was a Honda was the brand, and they had a new motorcycle called Honda. They put a G in between and they started marketing that motorcycle. It was very famous. But look at today. India is the largest manufacturer of motorcycles in the world. Why? And we are capturing the market because we scaled up. And scale brings efficiencies, and economy of scale brings down costs. And that is exactly what we have to learn from for solar. Similarly, look at an auto industry. Small car market, India is the king in the world today. All small car manufacturers want base in India. They're all exporting from here. Why? We are cost efficient. We are good in quality. But I agree, we need a long-term policy horizon. That is very important for people to invest. And that has nothing to do with solar manufacturing. I, as an IPP, also need a long-term policy horizon. I don't want today, suddenly, like what James said, 5 days before that safeguard duty comes. Now, today, as I stand, I don't know when the basic custom duty will come. And suddenly, one night, it will come, and it is applicable from next day. And I have a cash flow problem. I don't have a tap for money. Similarly, after 1 year, it will be saying that, oh, now the basic custom duty is 40%. How do I plan my investments? So everybody needs a consistent policy. And I think so this government, one thing is positive is that this government listens. It's time consuming because one thing is sure that government doesn't have money. And that is one reason why it takes so much time. Everybody wants incentive. Everybody is wanting incentive, and these are tough times. Government has no money to dole out cash. They have to look at the poor. We are a democratic country. We must keep that in mind. I believe solar manufacturing is one part. We are treading the same path in the battery manufacturing, and the faster we start, the better it is. Otherwise, we'll be having another panel discussion like this, what to do for the battery manufacturing.
Oh, we've already had that, and it was also as well attended and as passionately participated in. Great points, Sunil, excellent points. You have said that the government is not thorough. James also said that, and it is not coming with predictable policies. And perhaps there might be certain myths which are circulating, which are taken without going deeper into them and allowed to influence policy. As James brought out the point that there is no energy security angle so far he has seen as far as modules and cells are concerned. So great points. Coming back to Ramesh. So Ramesh, the questions which have come are on wafer, ingot and polysilicon production. What is the status here? What is the size of the investments which is required? What is the way to overcome any size changes which are brought in China in the cell size? How will our PV module industry handle those changes? Thirdly, how to make technology, how to adopt or choose that technology which helps us adapt to the changes in the technological terrain without having to have huge sunk cost, which we are stuck with, and then we cannot move where the market is going. Ramesh. I can't hear you.
Yeah, on the wafers and ingots, it's fundamentally whatever modules you need wafers and ingots for that, because from the wafers you make cells. So, like the vision of the Prime Minister is, for example, say to do 300 gigawatts of solar by 2030 out of the 450 of renewable, which Sunil Jain also just stated. Just imagine, today we have done about 36, 37 gigawatts on the in the country. Already 30 gigawatts has been bid out. So if you actually see in the next 10 years, you need to do something like about 240 gigawatts on the ground. And 240 gigawatts on the ground means every year you will do something like about 25 gigawatts. Fine. Even if I say I hit lower, at least 20 gigawatts of deployment is what we need to do in the country. Now, obviously, then what is that you need? You need something like 20 gigawatts of manufacturing in the country. If you want to do, it's completely be self-sufficient, which may not be the case. Some imports would happen, and there is something, it's a free market, so you may have, you cannot say the 100% of the requirement should come from within the country. But that's a scale I'm talking about. What is the scale of the problem in hand? I just want to state that. So the cell and module manufacturing is definitely coming out. Today we have, whatever numbers are stated, we have new announcements like the Vikram. Renew Power has announced some entry. We have Premier Solar Energy is actually putting some skin in the game. And obviously other existing manufacturers are also looking at expanding. But it's heartening to see that a lot of new people are coming in. And that's exactly what the country needs. And to that level, you need wafer ingoting also to come in. As of now, the country does not have any clear vision on wafer ingoting. Discussions are going on to bring out something like a development-linked manufacturing tender on the lines of cell and module in wafer and ingoting to give a sort of natural hedge to the manufacturing on the development side. But then there are discussions on the manufacturing policies also. So a lot of things are still being discussed. So we have to see how it comes out. And what's the other question, Pawanji, you said?
The other question was regarding how to adopt to the new sizes of cells which are coming. The Chinese are changing their cell size. So will this change in cell size need our module makers to adopt their technology? And if yes, how should they do that?
Of course, yeah. There has to be some adoption of the technology because you have larger cell sizes like 182 mm, 210 mm that's come out in the this thing. It cannot go infinitely higher. I think 210 could be one of those plateaus because there is a limitation on the ingoting side and the other side. So assuming that we have 210 mm as a standard size in a couple of years from now, obviously module manufacturers have to sort of come into way of how to handle that, because these cells also have certain cuts, there's a half cuts, triple cuts, and then it's got multiple other things like multi-bus bars, like 12 bus bars, it's like how much ever conducting points you create, how much ever current and power you can draw out of the cells. That's the whole logic behind the complete process. And I think India is well versed to do it. Whatever new equipments have been ordered are all would be compatible to 210 mm. So whatever new investments and new manufacturing setups that are being set up in the country, like we have one at 2 gigawatt manufacturing, Azura's one at 1 gigawatt, or 3 gigawatts anyway on the annual. So, excuse me, all this would actually be with the latest technology, and whatever else others are putting up also, I'm sure would be with the latest technology. Existing, a lot of lines are also getting upgraded as we talk. I know a lot of these manufacturers are upgrading their lines because somewhere at some point in time we have to be ready for a 182 mm wafer or a 210 mm wafer size in terms of compatibility.
Fine. Great. Pardon? So coming to James and Gagan, there was a lot of debate on imposition of BCD on imports from China and a lot of expectation of BCD imposition in the first week of September. However, we have not heard anything on this front till so far. What is the industry's expectation on this? And then our next question, I'll come to Gagan, and then last one to Sunil.
I'll be very quick. I think expectation, I guess there's two parts to that word. One is, what do I want? I want no BCD, or at least I want clarity that the BCD, exactly what date, what amount, and for a specific time horizon, and for it to be meaningful, a fairly long time horizon with a decreasing BCD. What do I actually expect will happen? I think it won't be so straightforward. It will take them time. One of the things that Sunil mentioned earlier that struck me is that there is a WTO structure out there, and this BCD debate and discussion is struggling against our international agreements. I know that our External Affairs Minister, Honorable Jaishankar, recently released a book, The India Way. And one of the ideas he brings out there is that the world of globalization is about to change. We're moving from a world of bilateral or country-wide agreement, not bilateral, just the country agreement, institution-led globalization structures to convergent interest-led globalization structure. And if that's true, if the underlying thesis of that is true, then much of these agreements that have been written under WTO and others are going to find that they're coming to an end in their life. And it's going to be a bold move that India has to make. And the BCD may be one of the early ones of those moves to suggest that the world order of convergent interest is going to shift. That's what I think will happen, but it requires a lot of debate and discussion to get there.
Excellent point, James. You are advocating from the side of the consumer. You are saying that till you can make these products in India up to a particular level of capacity and quality, do not increase the BCDs, etc., because that will only slow down the pace of the deployment. And you're also saying that we had reserved 50% of the budgeted capacity for domestically manufactured solar cells, but this was challenged successfully by the US by saying that these purchases are not for the government. Then the government, of course, steered, I would say, after this push, and when this policy was disallowed, after this push, it brought in certain sectors of defense and PSUs, etc., where this policy would be applicable. So what perhaps you are saying also is we should know what are the international agreements we are still part of and see spaces where we can maneuver rather than unknowingly stepping completely on the sanctity of those agreements and us having to retract our steps. Great point. Coming to Gagan. Gagan, what about rooftops? Actually, my interest in solar energy came from rooftops. We were wanting to put up a rooftop installation in our office because we are quite fed up with the generator. So what I'd like to know from you is how the rooftop market is moving and what is the impact of the indigenization versus import tussle which is going on it. Gagan.
I think the rooftop market has been growing at a pace which is much slower than what it should be growing at. The primary reason is that there is no credible mechanism to generate demand. There are no flexibility or scale. There are no scalable business models out there at a commercial scale, which can cater to the real needs of the consumer. See, when it comes to rooftops, what we need to realize is that suddenly we move away from a customer, which is a government entity or a utility or a discom, to someone who will buy or will consider buying solar only if it makes sense and only if he or she understands that why they should be buying it, right? So which means selling rooftop is not something which can be mandated primarily by government diktats, like the case in the utility scale solar. So therefore, when it comes to rooftop solar, it needs to be seen with a totally different set of eyes. So one of my sore points with the government is when they say out of the 100 gigawatts, 40 gigawatts is earmarked for rooftop solar. And it pains me to see that out of that 40 gigawatt of rooftop solar, bulk of it is still coming from large scale projects under the name of open access. So it is not a pure captive rooftop system, but it's again a large scale utility scale solar project, which is basically, rather than selling it to the various distribution companies, it is selling, it is aggregating demand for various off-takers, industrial off-takers, and then selling it to them. So from a rooftop industry perspective, for it to grow really fast and to its full potential, which is huge, I think it has to be looked at a little differently from the traditional infrastructure tag of large scale utility scale solar. Then only it can get its full potential.
Excellent point. Coming to Sunil. Sunil, there is a gentleman who is calling himself the anonymous attendee. There are almost everybody here I've seen are CSOs and CXOs, and his question is very sharp. And that question plus another question I'm going to ask you. So the question which he's asking is that in 2007, the silicon industry collapsed, and this collapse hit the thin film solar industry also. And today the silicon ingot manufacturers of that time, who could not survive the crash, are into jewelry business. So how does and they are not very successful jewelers also. So how does the industry make sure that the money it is investing is not has some kind of an immunity to the sudden change in technology? So that is the first question, and I'll come to the second one in a moment.
First advice, if you are an equity investor, you are at risk. Please, as an equity investor, you have to take the risk and you have to share the spoils, whether good or bad. I have been repeatedly saying that there is a technological risk in solar. There are new technologies coming up. Leave aside the monopark, monopark and poly and all those things. There could be a totally new technology which you could just paint a glass and it start giving the same efficiencies. Half the industries in China may collapse. No, who knows that? So that risk will always remain, and as an investor, you have to take that risk. The other way around to circumvent that is keep evolving in technology, which I am repeatedly saying. That R&D is the key to the success. That will keep you ahead of the curve and you will not collapse. Look at today what is happening. You know what happened to Nokia. We know what happened to Kodak. There are n number of examples I can give you which collapsed because they could not match the technological curve. So that question that you will get immunity, sorry. This is a free market world. Again, I would come back to that.
Yeah, great point. Go ahead.
I would like to ask one question to Ramesh.
Yeah, go ahead.
I talked about China being a cartelized economy. We manufacture everything except the ingot. Let's assume that. Even wafers we start manufacturing here. What happens if Chinese ingot manufacturers cartelize and they start cross-subsidizing Chinese players with Indian pricing? So suppose an ingot costs 100 rupees, they give India 120 rupees and Chinese 80 rupees.
I think, Sunil, that's a definite risk because again, it comes out of the.
What I'm saying is,
it comes out of the dependence on a geography. Fundamentally, we're coming back to the same point.
So exactly. So then I was just wanting to say that in order for us to be absolutely Atmanirbhar in true sense, you need to manufacture complete value chain.
At least till ingot and wafer, we need to go. Definitely, that's what we will represent the government also, because polysilicon has got multiple sources beyond China. Yeah. Though the majority sources in China, but you got European sources and other sources.
You got Korea also.
Yeah, but then ingot and wafer should also be done in India to get the real.
What I'm saying is that you have to be China agnostic. Yes, now coming to Pawan, you can ask me what was the other.
I think you've answered, between you and Ramesh, you answered great points, superb points. And I think what we have all agreed on is that scale is important. However, to make the ecosystem well balanced and have opportunities which only the small can spot, the small industry should also be encouraged. There is a saying, "Jahan kaam aaye sui, wahan kya kaam kare talwar." That means we are very proud of the talwars which we have, the big ones which we have, and Adani really has added to our honor and pride in the international sector. We need the small players also. We need manufacturing and deployment both to go simultaneously. And the third is the energy self-sufficiency part is very important. We should not tomorrow become dependent on photovoltaics for our energy. We should be able to make them end-to-end, 100% integrated. So, or at least if we depend on polysilicon, which is the raw material, we know that we have South Korea, Japan, US also, which we can source from. So we have multiple supplies of the mother mineral, and thereafter we should be end-to-end integrated from ingots right up to the modules. So great points. Thank you very much, and really enjoyed chatting up with you, and very happy to see so many people stay with us right up to the end, even if when we cross the timeline. I pass it on to Siddharth now.
Certainly, thank you very much, sirs. Our leaders and I have taken home so many nuggets, so much learnings from today's conversation, and a very well moderated Mr. Chaudhary. I'm still receiving positive messages from our leaders on my phone and on email. So while a lot of the questions have been covered wonderfully and has given us a well-rounded idea of the landscape, we also received specific and focused questions which may require a longer and one-to-one discussion between the leaders in the audience and our experts. So we would be happy to fix meetings between you and our expert pool in the energy field for mutual benefit. And thank you to our attendees for staying till the end and in such large numbers. Whether you would like to engage with us through our expert panel or as learners, you're invited to connect with us for membership. We're soon launching our digital professional networking platform curated specifically for leaders across the 4 sectors of healthcare, energy, e-mobility, and real estate. We will be sending out invitations shortly to select 1,000 members across these 4 sectors. So thank you again, sirs. It has been an absolute privilege and a pleasure, and thank you, leaders in the audience.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.